Welcome back to the Global Business Report here on Arise News. We're head to Ghana now. Ghana expects the International Monetary Fund to approve a first loan tranche of $600 million as soon as Wednesday, paving the way for a disbursement within a week. Now, the country, of course, seeking $3 billion from the IMF to shore up its battered economy. On Friday, IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva said Ghana's official creditors had provided the necessary financing assurances for the IMF Executive Board to look at signing off on the loan. Now, let's take a look at some of the metrics now from Ghana. We saw inflation year on year decelerating to 41.2% from a two-decade high of 54.1. You saw it come down to 53.6. This is, of course, December 2022. 53.6 in January, 52.8 in February, 45%, that was a big drop there, deceleration in March, and then 41.2 in April year on year. Let's go to GDP figures, 3.7% year on year GDP. That's Q4 in Ghana. Now, of course, it was a slowdown from what we saw year on year. In Q4 2021, it was 7%. So this is, of course, for the fourth quarter of 2022. We look at some of the metrics like oil growth for Ghana as far as the fourth quarter was concerned, and also non-oil growth. And you can see, okay, this is the GDP, full year GDP growth, 3.1% from 5.1% in 2021. So Ghana's economy slowing a bit. Now, of course, the metrics behind the growth for the economy was non-oil. So this is Q4 oil growth, 3.7%. It was 5.6 in the prior year. Non-oil growth, much like Nigeria, was what pushed Ghana's economy forward as far as growth is concerned in the fourth quarter and full year. So 4.3% non-oil in Q4. Look at that drop there. It was almost 7% in the prior year. So as far as the growth drivers, I think ICT, education, and a number of other sectors that did well. So ICT 20.5%, public administration 15.7%, mining 13.4%, education 12.3%, health and social work 10.5%. So that's how Ghana's economy is looking right now. We're going to head to Accra and speak with Fred Duvor, who is the managing director of Apakan Securities. Fred, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to start with the IMF. How confident are you that we can get that $600 million tranche out of that $3.1 billion loan?
Well, with the reports that is coming through, I'm pretty confident that the first tranche will be coming in the next week or two, but I'm not so sure about Wednesday as has been reported. The IMF board is set to approve the facility on Wednesday, following which it'll be processes towards its actual disbursement. I think it was just last week, Thursday, that the official bilateral creditors formed a committee, and this was co-chaired by France and China to give the financing assurances, which was always a prerequisite to securing the IMF board approval, in addition to the domestic debt exchange program, which concluded in February. So the most important thing now is the fact that Ghana is set to cross the line, and it is positive news for the economy.
Now, we've been on this $3 billion loan matter for well over a year. What other T's need to be crossed or I's that need to be dotted for the IMF, I guess, to give that final green light?
At this juncture, I think pretty much what needs to be done has been done. What was holding up the process following the staff level agreement, which was reached in December last year, was the financing assurances from bilateral lenders. Because of China's portion of Ghana's debt holdings, which is almost about $2 billion, the negotiations took rather longer than was anticipated. But mind you, Ghana announced its intentions to go to the IMF in August last year, and actually began the process in September. So to have seemingly concluded the process in 8 months is quite impressive. If you look at the fact that countries like Zambia, which began its process about 2 or so years, still hasn't gotten over the line, and it took Egypt even longer to secure its facility. So in terms of timelines, I think Ghana has done a pretty good job in meeting the criteria of the IMF, and things are only looking up for Ghana from here on.
All right, optimistic note. In fact, more optimistic news. We've seen inflation decelerate in Ghana to 41.2 now. Well, what were the factors for this latest deceleration that we saw for year on year in April?
I think there are three main factors. The first, in my opinion, will be the relative stability of the cedi versus the dollar. We know that Ghana is a very import-dependent country, so the stability of the currency goes a long way in keeping prices in check. Even though the first 2 months of the year, the cedi took a bit of a beating, it recovered quite significantly in March and in April, where it appreciated against the dollar, and we see its effect in inflation figures. Secondly, we are at a point where we have a very favorable base effect, where the CPI base level from last year is much higher than what we are seeing now. So that is also playing a part in the inflation dropping as quickly as it is. And lastly, also global crude price, the low level of global oil prices. The price declines affects export prices, which also has a pass-through effect on general prices of goods and services in the market. So we've had a nice cocktail of positive things affecting inflation, and we expect to see inflation continue its downward trend.
Oh, okay, well, yeah, so you preempted my next question. So you do see inflation decelerating further as the year progresses?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, you add that to the fact that the first tranche of IMF money is coming in. That goes to reiterate the point that I made earlier about the stability of the cedi having an effect on prices. And with this IMF money coming in, we see that the central bank is going to have a lot of reserves to be able to support the cedi. So there's going to be relative stability of the currency. And the base effect, last year around this time, we saw inflation accelerate quite quickly, and we're not seeing that now. So that base effect is also going to kick in even further. Come end of month in June, where I'm pretty certain that we're going to see inflation enter the 30% band.
All right, very encouraging. So what does the MPC, Dr. Ernest Addison and the MPC do at the next meeting? Do they hold rates then?
Yeah, well, yeah, they're meeting on Wednesday to discuss this, and I think with the recent developments and the short-term outlook to inflation, I expect the committee to hold rates at the meeting. Inflation, as I mentioned earlier, will be entering the 30 band in May and continue trend downward. So I will really be surprised to see anything other than a hold or a cut by the MPC, though I think a cut at this meeting may be unlikely. Possibly at the June meeting, if the disinflationary trend continues at this pace, then we may see a slight cut. But my strong expectation is that at this meeting, there will be a hold.
All right. Now, what do you make of Ghana's latest economic figures as far as Q4 GDP is concerned? Is the non-oil sector the future of economic growth?
Well, yeah. Q4, the performance of the economy in Q4 was marginally better than that of Q3. But generally, the growth performance of the economy in 2022 compares quite poorly to that of 2021, where GDP grew by about 5.1% or so. Growth will definitely be driven by non-oil, by the non-oil sector, especially the services sector, which has been the usual driving force for our economic growth. And you can see that the services sector recovered quite aggressively in Q4. I think it grew at about 7.6%. We see that with the general tightening of economic conditions, the industrial and agri sector will suffer the most in terms of growth this year. Also, global oil prices are relatively low, and that is expected to affect growth in the oil sector. So I have no doubt that the non-oil sector is going to drive growth, but in terms of the general growth level, I'm not too optimistic about that.
Okay, now what about the cedi? I think you mentioned it's appreciating a bit, earlier when we were speaking. Can the cedi, the Ghanaian cedi, the currency, strengthen further this year? What's the outlook there?
100%. I strongly believe that we may see a bit of an appreciation. To be honest, the cedi has been impressive this year, looking at the conditions of the economy. A lot of analysts expected a bloodbath for the cedi following its performance last year. The country having to go under an IMF program and all of that. But in the past a little over 2 months, it has actually held its own. And with the IMF money coming in now, the central bank, like I mentioned earlier, will have a lot more reserves to be able to support the currency. So I'm expecting that at the barest minimum, the city will remain relatively stable. We're not going to experience what we did last year, where the city depreciated by about 45%. I think a year-to-date depreciation, we are somewhere around 12%, and I expect it to stay same or even get better if the central bank decides to intervene aggressively in the FX market, following the fact that it's going to get a lot more dollar reserves with the IMF money.
Now, Fred, still on the Ghanaian Cedi, can you talk to us about how important it's been, despite all of Ghana's challenges, to have a transparent single exchange rate? We here in Nigeria are still dealing with multiple exchange rates. Arise News was in Ghana for the African Development Bank spring meeting, so we saw what it was like there. Can you speak to how that has helped things to have a single transparent exchange rate that foreign investors and everybody just knows what it is and there's nothing else distorting that?
Well, I mean, Ghana has had a floating exchange rate for quite some time now, and that has kind of helped. We have the central bank interfering a lot less in the rates that is posted on the market. So usually, when there's relative stability in the economy, the exchange rates are quite stable across all markets. You would find maybe a few bips difference between the black markets, which I think every country has really, and the official rate, but it's not as what you guys experience over in Nigeria. And that has made things easier for investors. When there is, I must say that when there is tightening of USD reserves, you tend to find a bit of widening in the rates between what is on the black market and the official rate. But even at that, you tend to find maybe a few pesos difference also. So we are quite used to this, and I guess that is also one of the reasons why the Ghanaian cedi can take a bit of a beating in times when there's economic tightening. So I think when it comes to that kind of comparison, we are better positioned, and it's much clearer for investors.
Thank you for that. Okay, finally, full year GDP, 3.1%. We just talked about the fourth quarter. What's your outlook, I guess, for economic growth this year for Ghana?
There will most definitely be a further slowdown in economic growth this year. Financing conditions have been quite tight, and being under an IMF program with all the debt overhang the country has, I believe the country will have to go through a certain period of austerity. Cost of credit, cost of capital is quite high, financial conditions are tight, and this will significantly affect growth. I think the government in its own projections during the budget reading projected growth to around 2.8% in 2023, which I believe is rather optimistic. The IMF has also revised its growth projections for Ghana to 1.6%, which seems a little bit more realistic, in my opinion, given the current economic conditions. You have policy rates at 30%. There's lending to the private sector has slowed down. Consumption is low. So all these things point to the fact that there's going to be a slowdown in growth this year as well.
And Fred, just so I could squeeze one more question out of you. If you look at some of the drivers of growth, you mentioned the services sector. So we saw ICT do about 20%, mining double digits, I think education as well. ICT, mining, would you think that these public administration defense, that 15%, are these still going to be the drivers going forward as far as the economy is concerned?
Yeah, 100%. Mining has always been an important part of the Ghanaian economy. We've been one of the largest gold producers on the continent. So mining has always been critical to our economic woes. ICT has also, in recent years, been very critical in economic growth. The government from 2016 has embarked on a massive digitalization project. So Ghana is moving quite strongly in the area of digitalization. So that is impacting a lot in the ICT sector. So these are the usual suspects, and I have no doubt that they're going to continue driving economic growth. It would be. I think that Greek may tend to contribute a little bit more this year in terms of growth. We seem to be on the path to getting good weather, and there's going to be better produce. But I don't think there will be a large variation from who the usual guys and the usual contributors or drivers of economic growth are.
Excellent stuff. MD of Apakan Securities, Fred Duvor from Accra. Thank you so much for talking to us, Fred. It was a pleasure you giving us the lowdown on the latest from Ghana. Thank you so much.